Hello, my name's Steve Kirby, and in this video I'm going to show you how to customize limb layers. I'm going to make a new comp like that. I'm going to make a new limb like this, and then I'm just going to talk a little bit about what makes a custom limb layer, what we mean by customizing. Okay, so obviously on the end controller here we have the limb effect, and we have all these parameters in here, some of which are to do with kind of styling choices. So I might want to make this limb a different color like this, and I might want to change where the split goes, and I might want to make it really big at the top like that, or really small at the bottom. And anything I do in here in this limber effect is not a customization, that's just kind of styling it. And because we've restricted ourselves to what's sort of possible with the basic effect, I can freely sort of swap in and out for other types, like the bone, for example. I'll do that now, and then I can come back to the tapered type, and all those changes are going to be still there. Because when we swap, what it does is it replaces the limb layer, the yellow layer, with a fresh copy of whichever type we've got selected. And we hadn't actually made any changes to the original copy. We just made changes to the effect controls. So the new fresh copy is just going to mirror those colors and sizes just the same as the old one did. But if I come into my limb layer and I make some sort of further changes myself manually here, like let's do the kind of thing that we did in the introductory tutorial and make the distal lower, actually it'd be the proximal lower C3 circle. We'll kill that expression and make that bigger, so we have a kind of trouser like that. Now if I swap out for a bone like that, we get a fresh copy of a bone, and now we swap out for a 2018 and we get a fresh copy of a 2018. Obviously that customization is going to be lost. It took a little while to pop in there. So if you want to use the swap button with custom limbs, then you need to kind of save your custom limb style somewhere in the comp, in another limb, or in another comp in a limb, such that you can copy and paste it back. Because the copy and paste buttons and the duplicate button do work with those customizations. So I'll just go back in and make that change again to the C3 circle size here. So I'll make that bigger. Now if I duplicate this limb, let's call this one left, you will see that the duplicate is in fact exactly the same and still has that customization. And the same thing happens with the copy and paste. In fact, the copy and paste and the duplicate button, what they do is they copy the limber effect values, such as the colors and the sizes, but excluding things like the clockwise control, because quite often you want one limb to be clockwise and the other one to be anti-clockwise. And they also replicate the limb layer and sort of relink the new replicated copy to your other controllers. So this right leg layer here, I'm going to actually apply a roughen edges effect, and let's just set that to be a bit bigger so you can kind of see it like that. Now that roughen edges effect has obviously got nothing to do with the shape layer shapes, but it is on that layer. So now when I hit copy and then come to my other one and hit paste, we're going to see that any changes we've made, including adding that effect, are brought over. So that means that we can apply expression effect controls onto a layer, like sliders or rotation controls, and those are also going to be copied over, and they'll still be, if we link those sliders up to properties in here, then they're still going to be copied over. So I've got this slider control I just made, and let's link this C3 size to this slider. So I'm going to hit Alt and click on the size property, then I'm going to drag the pick whip icon down to this slider. So that does that for me. Now my slider is going to control the size of that trouser, so it's kind of dynamic. So that's set that to say 260. And now if I hit copy and come back to the other one and hit paste, I'm going to find that the same thing has copied over. So the effects on this layer include the roughen edges and the slider control, which is set to 260 just like it was. So we've now got these kind of dynamic controls on our custom limb layers. The next thing I want to talk about is how the limb layer is actually made up, so we can get on with explaining how to customize it in other ways than just this kind of simple trouser leg here. So I'm going to delete one of these two like that, and I'm going to take the roughen edges off of there. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just swap it out for a fresh copy so that we lose that customization. Okay, so limb layers are, tapered limb layers are by default made up of these kind of 3 circles which start at the hip or shoulder, and we call that one C1, and then the joint is C2, and then the kind of ankle or the wrist is C3. And inside the limb layer you've got the limb group and the admin group, and the admin is just a bunch of expressions which we don't really want to mess around with, and the limb group has this upper group which is that part, and the lower group which obviously is that part. What we'll do is just change these colors so that we can show you a bit more easily. Okay, so in the upper group we then have the proximal upper, and that's the half that is closer, you know, has greater proximity to where the limb usually attaches to the body. Proximal and distal are just kind of medical terms. So the proximal upper is that sort of red top half, and the distal upper is the kind of lower half of the upper. And the same thing happens in the lower group, like that. The upper group and the lower group are not dependent on one another. They're not nested in, one isn't nested inside the other like you'd usually get with, say, a Duick limb. So I can actually just delete an entire half of the limb, or I could delete one of the groups within it, or I could drag the lower group on top of the upper group if I wanted to sort of change which one kind of renders topmost, and various other sort of things like that. The lower group and the upper group and their sort of subgroups are kind of they have expressions on some of their values and not others. So the lower group, for example, will have an expression on its position and its rotation, which causes it to be at the point of the knee and to rotate down towards where the ankle goes. So this position expression is linked to one of the ones in the admin group, P2, and the rotation is linked to one of the ones in the admin group, that's A2. So we can kind of easily add shapes into this lower group, and they'll be kind of oriented along the lower half of the limb. No matter how we drag our or animate our end controller around, they're going to kind of stick there, which is you know, very obviously kind of useful for customizing. So let's just say that we wanted to make this leg a bit like the kind of shorts and socks preset here. Now this is a custom limb from the limb library, but in this case what I've done is I've actually used a separate layer for the stripes there on this sort of pink layer here. But it might be better if we actually put those stripes embedded inside the limb itself, so we don't need them to be on a separate layer. So rather than actually make a new dot, why don't I just copy and paste these? So I'll hit copy, I'll come back to this comp and hit paste, and now we have these sort of stripes which are just made up of a rectangle and a fill and a repeater. So we've got funny rotation there. So where's that? That's just on the layer itself. So we'll just straighten that up. In fact, we'll reset that to the center. And then let's put the repeater above the fill. And then I'll call this group stripes. And what I need to do actually is add a merge paths under the repeater like that, so that this stripes group is now going to be sort of treated as one shape effectively. The merge path just kind of merges the copies that the repeater makes into one shape. So if I now take that stripes shape group, I'm going to hit copy, then I'm going to come down to my limb and I'm going to select the lower group and hit paste, and the stripes will paste into the lower group. So I'll just drag those up. You should be able to see them there. They're just poking out. They're not rendering on top yet. So why is that? Let's turn the proximal and distal lower off and move our stripes down a bit. Oh, they're underneath the upper group, of course. So let's just delete the original stripes layer. We don't need that anymore. So now what I want to do is make these stripes kind of cropped to the shape of the lower limb. So let's turn those back on like that and move them a bit lower to where they're going to go in relationship to the sort of sock. So I need to get this kind of outer shape of the entire lower limb as one shape, so that I can kind of cut out the stripes with that shape. So what I'll do is I'll take one of the two lower groups. Let's take the proximal lower, and I'm going to duplicate that by selecting it and then hitting Command D. So I've got this proximal lower 2, and then inside this, I'll tell you what, I'll just rename this to let's call it all lower, and then in there I'm going to get rid of the crop group and the intersect and the fill, so that now I have one shape that just corresponds to the entire lower limb. It's not cropped anymore. Then my stripes are on top of that, and I'm not going to want that fill there either inside the stripes group, because I need to sort of deal with the stripes group as one shape and the all lower group as one shape, and then apply the fill to what results from sort of merging both those two. So if I kill this fill here, and then I'll just twirl these up so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to select the stripes group and the all lower group, and then I'm going to hit Command G to group them inside a new group. Then in this new group, I'm going to need to add a merge paths operator underneath the stripes and the all lower, and I'm not going to want it set to add. I'm going to want to set it to probably intersect. Yeah. So, and it's also added a stroke and a fill automatically for me, which is what happens when you add a merge paths. I don't need the stroke, so I'm just going to delete that. And now I've got these kind of stripes which are going to move around with the rest of the limb, and they're also going to react to some degree to changes I make in the shape. So I could make the end size a little bit bigger or smaller, and that shape group that they're in is going to the sort of all lower group is going to obviously react to that shape. So they're going to be kind of perfectly cropped in that way. Now, obviously, they're like the level of kind of dynamism that those stripes have is limited. If I go and make my end group really big, then they're not going to react to that. And you can also see that the lower split is going up and down a little bit, reacting to the change in the sort of length of the lower group, and the stripes aren't reacting along with that either. So, that's sort of not ideal, but it takes a little bit more work to get that kind of level of sort of dynamism in custom groups inside a custom limb layer. But let's just sort of move the leg around and see whether it's a problem. We can see that those stripes are slightly kind of moving up and down on the sock as we sort of stretch the limb in and out. And the reason that's happening is because the anti-pop is on, which is actually changing the limb length. If I come down and decide I don't need any of that anti-pop, then I think we'll find that the stripes kind of stay in one place. Well, they do until we actually literally stretch the limb, and then they go off as well. So let's say we didn't want to use the anti-pop, and we didn't want these stripes to sort of have this appearance of moving around up and down. Let's say we wanted them to kind of look like they were sort of, maintaining their relationship to the sock and their position relative to the sock. And what we need to do is position those stripes instead of in a kind of fixed way with a sort of in terms of, like, at the moment what we're doing is we're positioning them with this value here, minus 151, which is just how many pixels are they from the knee. So we're moving these relative to this knee here. But what we really want to do is move them as a proportion of the distance between the knee and the ankle, which is a little bit more complicated. But if I go and import my custom limb library, which is going to be a moment in here for me, there is a limb in there which has some of this kind of stuff done already. So that would be the t-shirt. So in this t-shirt here, you'll see that these two kind of anchor tattoos do move around dynamically as we stretch the limb out, because they're positioned in a slightly more clever way. So we would need to kind of copy and paste the behavior that they have. And actually, if I select this, this is all kind of talked about in the instructions here, but if I select this limb layer from the t-shirts limb, then there are on the effect controls these two sort of expression effect controls of upper tattoo position and lower tattoo position, and that's dictating where along the upper and lower limb those tattoos are positioned. If I put this to 0, you'll see it snaps to the point of the shoulder, and if I set this to 100, it's going to snap to the point of the elbow. So I'll just set that back to 50 for now. So we're going to need some kind of positioning slider like this for the stripes. So what I'll do is I'll come back to our comp, I'll select the limb layer, and I'll make a new expression control slider control, and I'm going to call that stripes position, and I'm going to set it to 50, which will be a sort of percentage. And then we need to you get the right kind of expression that we have in this t-shirt layer. So let's look at the lower tattoo here. So where are we? That's the upper group. So in the lower group, I have this lower group tattoo only, and then there is this tattoo, and it has this position expression here. So I'm going to copy that, all of it. Then I'm going to come back to this comp and look at my stripes position, and I'm going to make an expression on there. I'm going to paste that expression. It's going to be an error because it's looking for the lower tattoo position slider, which we don't have. So if I just edit this expression and change the lower tattoo position to the stripes position, oh, we're still getting an error. So why is that? That's because that expression was looking for a left wrist, and we have got a left ankle. I think that might work now. Yes. So now what I can do, well, let's drag the lower group above the upper group for one thing, because it's going to show up the stripes better. Now I can use this stripes position control to just position the stripes where I want them. Let's say about there. And hopefully now when we move the end controller around, those stripes are behaving a little bit better, but there's still a little bit of a sort of change between the top of the stripes and the top of the socks. And the reason for that is that the stripes are kind of like, they kind of have their origin point or their anchor point at the bottom. They're kind of growing upwards. So it would be better if we had them sort of coming downwards, and then their actual position, their relative position, will be closer to the sort of same sort of relative position at the top of the sock. So I'm going to come into the repeater, and I'm going to just change that sort of 20 pixels in the Y to -20, so they kind of grow downwards instead of upwards. Then I'm going to come back to this stripes position, zoom in a bit, and I'm going to just adjust that back to, say, there. And then now I should find that they stick pretty closely to the top of the sock. Yeah, that's pretty good now. Even when we kind of drag things out with a stretch, we're not seeing that big sort of change in difference between the sort of relationship of where the stripes are on the leg and where the top of the sock is on the leg. And the reason for that is because the top of the sock is obviously the upper split, the lower split, which is set to 55%. We can see that there. And we're using, the value of 57% for this stripes position, which is, pretty close to 55%. So it's proportionally going to be in almost the same place as the top of the sock. Whereas before it was positioned lower down and the stripes themselves don't scale. You see, that's the difference, is that everything else is actually sort of getting slightly bigger or smaller proportionally. Whereas the stripes, we set them up so they moved proportionally, but they still don't scale. So what we need to do is kind of keep their origin point as close to the top of the sock as possible, which is what we've just done by sort of making them grow downwards like that. And I could now obviously come into the upper group and change, say, the distal uppers, C1, just to kill that expression and sort of make that a different size. So I've got something that looks like a pair of shorts. And if I wanted to change that curve on there, that doesn't sort of look quite right. I could come into the proximal upper and change the C2, so I can kind of manually make that something a bit closer to sort of say parallel like that. And then we've got some pretty good sort of shorts and socks there for a character, and I can carry on doing all my rigging by sort of duplicating that, give that another name, sort of prefix, and when that's kind of finished doing all its business, I can then obviously move those over. I'm probably going to want the new one to be clockwise like that, and carry on sort of making my character. And if I make any more styling changes, then let's just say we want a different football team that has blue like that, then I can still copy, come to my other limb and paste, and those changes are going to come through regardless of whether they're changes to the limb layer or changes to the styling controls in the limber effect on the end controller. So that's it for showing you how to customize things in the limb layer in this tutorial. If you are kind of intrigued by all the expressions and the different kind of shape groups and the stuff in the limb layer, and you are sort of really into kind of rigging in that way, and you want to understand more fully how to play around with all that stuff, the best place for you to start is really going to be in the user guide, because that's all sort of laid out in a pretty methodical way in there. There's a sort of section towards the end here called customizing limbs, and that'll kind of walk you through the basics of the IK kind of triangle and the sort of naming conventions that we use internally in the shape group names and in the expressions to refer to different things like the angles of the upper and the lower and so on. And this kind of information will be a good sort of quick start for you to writing your own expressions or understanding how R1s work, so that you can copy and paste and modify them, all the shape groups and so on, and do similar stuff to what we've done here, but for whatever you want to do. If you've got any questions about that stuff, because it seems too kind of arcane, and you want to ask me, then send me a support ticket via the aescripts website, and I'll do my best to answer as quickly as possible. That's it for today. I hope this has been useful. I hope it's been fun to watch, and I hope you have fun with your limbs. See you soon. Bye.